Welcome everyone to today's webinar on understanding top distributor deductions and how to prevent them. I've been sharing and posting about this topic a lot recently. It's a personal experience that I've been through that was quite horrible, and know a lot of founders who have been through this as well. I think we're in a particularly challenging time in the industry right now where, as brands, a lot of us are expanding into retail, and in order to get there have to go through some of the national distributors, but at the same time are faced with the challenges and the expense of having to deal with those relationships. One thing that I've understood is that a lot of what we're agreeing to upfront, if you're a first-time founder, you might not fully understand the contract of what you're actually agreeing to and how all that plays together. In the post that someone replied to this, they're like, hey, all this was in the agreement with the distributor up front. Shouldn't you know about it? And as these things are written, a lot of them are like, if this happens, then this. And you're like, okay, but you don't really understand how often that happens and how all of those deductions and chargebacks stack on top of each other and are spread out over months. So I get you. It's very confusing. You're not alone. Literally dozens of founders reached out after my post saying like, this is the crap that I'm dealing with as well. And it's putting me out of business or almost putting me out of business. So let's rewind a little bit. What I want to do today is go through how you can understand deduction chargebacks as they're happening and how you can reduce the legitimate ones, but might be caused from errors on just shipping or the marketing that you're putting out there. And then also how to fight some of the illegitimate ones. So for this conversation, I've invited on Akash, who is the founder of Glimpse, which is an AI platform that helps to understand, manage, and fight invalid deductions. Akash, welcome on today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Jordan. Definitely excited to do this webinar with you. Have been, living and breathing deductions every single day now since we've launched. So I'm excited to share some of the learnings that I've accumulated and also just, like some of the ways that as a brand you can help, get money back, be on top of your deductions and, thrive through these distributors and retailers.
Awesome. And so I think we designed this presentation today to really be about how to understand the deductions that you're facing and then how to reduce those and walk away. So that my goal is for everyone listening, you are coming out of this webinar with valuable tips and kind of how-tos for approaching this with your business, and then some practical tools for how to solve it. So Akash, why don't you jump into the presentation?
Yeah, of course. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Awesome.
Looks good.
See my screen? Awesome. Cool. Yeah, definitely, excited to walk through this presentation. Jordan kind of mentioned the different things we'll talk about. One thing I know we do have an audience here from all over. For the sake of this presentation, just tied to where I and the team at Glimpse have expertise, we'll be focusing on KE and Unified Deduction specifically, which are the two largest natural distributors in the US. So if you think about, distributing to like Whole Foods or Sprouts, you're likely using one of these distributors. So a lot of the learnings and processes, I think, in managing deductions will translate across the board, but a lot of the content's curated to these two distributors. So I'll go ahead and jump in here. So before even going into types of deductions, etc., just to set the stage and preface like just what deductions even are. Deductions are when a retailer or distributor deducts amounts from an invoice from CPG brands. They start occurring once you sign a contract with the distributor. So like right here, a lot of things are scrubbed out, but you can kind of see here like this is like an example check or remittance that you receive from like Unify. And you can kind of see here, you have so many different line items with really obscure codes, etc., of just random like negative amounts of money that you're losing. So maybe you expected to receive like $20,000 and you only got paid like $10,000. Like this is ultimately how you would be told that happened. Like you have all these plans in your forecasts and actuals, and then when you actually receive your actual like check, all this money is deducted, and it linearly scales as you continue to grow. So maybe when you start, you ship your first purchase order, you receive a handful of deductions. That just continues to, scale with you as you continue to grow. Where, we've seen customers with thousands of deductions coming in like every single week or every single month. So,
Oh
um,
gosh, I love this example too. And I right? If you look at this and that second line item is basically an invoice, number 773, what was built for $11,995. But after all the deductions and chargebacks, as a brand, you only receive $3,599, right? Which is a significant, is basically, almost, a third of what you were expecting. And maybe some of these were planned, maybe not, but especially as you showed with these kind of random numbers and the codes, like it's really hard to understand and track what every single thing was for. I'd love to get sense from the audience. If you've received a remittance or payment like this from UNFI or KHE, I'd love for you to say like yes in the chat so we can see, how many people have actually experienced this. I've received lots of remittances like this. Was like, what the hell just happened? Where's the money that I was owed?
Right. Oh,
I
wow.
see
Sounds
people
like
like, yes, yes, so many of these. Oh my God, yes. Right? Like it's ridiculous how this is happening.
Yeah, no, definitely. And we, see this every single day. And it was, it's crazy. Even just looking at some of these invoice numbers, there's just like no way, unless you know every single type of deduction coming in, like what it might even mean. Like, why did we receive a $1,250 charge? What does that even mean? So it's, super painful for brand operators. And obviously, we're seeing in the chat just how many people have faced it. So definitely excited to jump in, but wanted to first, set the stage of what deductions even are. So, yeah. So, I mean, just kind of jumping in. And yeah, as Jordan mentioned, like please feel free to use the chat to ask any questions live. Definitely can sort of answer them or address them as they come in. But wanted to start off by just talking through like what the most common deductions a brand might see when they work with the distributor like Unifier KHE. So, and one thing to preface here that we'll kind of, you'll kind of see as we go through the presentation, just because deductions are the most common doesn't necessarily mean that they're like inaccurate or anything like that. They just happen to be like what you see most frequently. So the first type are like spoilage, return, and damages essentially. So, and this is kind of like tied to what I mentioned in the first slide, is that deductions really start when you just agree to work with a distributor like Unifier KHE. So for example, when you work with KHE, this one of the standard line items is that you commit to a 2% spoils allowance on every single product order. So just every single time as you ship products, you're also, getting deductions for 2%, just even if the products are okay, just tied to a standard 2% spoil allowance that you received when you signed your agreement with KHE. So this is like one example of a standard term that typically you agree upon with the distributor. And there's a handful of these. For example, KHE also has like BI allowance to get access to their data, which is another like fixed 2%. Unify actually just launched something similar. So that's probably the first tier of like the most common deductions, like things that stem from what you've just agreed upon that just hit you with every single product you're shipping. And the second type are promotion and slotting deductions. So typically, whenever you launch at a new retailer or expanding store counts, you can be launching new doors or selling new SKUs into new stores. There's typically slotting charges associated, which are when you're slotting new goods into the stores. So this is a very common type of deduction that occurs, especially when you're launching with new accounts or you really want to, if you launch with a really big account and you want to do like a nationwide launch or anything like that. And then the other most common type of promotional deduction are just a lot of the marketing related efforts that you do that can, that can be different on a per retailer basis. It starts at the distributor level. Like for example, you can work with KHE and Unify and agree upon specific promotions that you can kind of they can kind of launch upon across all their retailers. And you can also agree upon specific contract types of promotions with specific stores and retailers. And this is a really common thing that brands face, just because obviously if you want consumers to try your product, having some sort of promotional activity that's running in stores is super helpful. And this ends up being, one of the most common deductions as a result. And the way to kind of think about it is you have all these plans, maybe like 2 quarters in advance, and you're planning them, you're agreeing with your retailer partners, etc. And then once they're executed, they come in as deductions when you actually get paid. And that's, when we talk about some of the challenges with deductions, like that's one thing as well, just being able to tie these deductions for promotions to actually what you agreed upon. So yeah, so these, are what we see as like the most common deductions. Are there any questions or anything tied to this so far?
No, I don't think so.
Cool. Awesome. So now, like I would say one of the biggest challenges and just pain points about deductions is like you're receiving all these deductions. We kind of just talked through what are some of the most common types of deductions. One of the, I would say, like big things about the industry is that a percentage of these end up being invalid. And that's ultimately what creates, such like a big pain point in managing these deductions. So after talking to hundreds of brand founders, dozens of fractional CFOs, and just really getting a pulse check in the industry, like what we've kind of realized is that 5 to 10% of the deductions you receive through KHE and Unified typically end up being like invalid. And that, creates a huge time sink because even though a majority of your deductions might be valid, like the spoils allowances, the promotional agreements that you agreed upon, etc., it then creates the necessity and urgency to like really validate every single deduction that comes in and make sure that it's actually valid. And a good way to kind of think about this and get a gut check here is if you're kind of committing to like in your margin profile, like 25% of your margin goes towards deductions. That means like 2% of your bottom line essentially can go to invalid deductions if 10% of them are invalid. So just thinking about that in terms of your scale and like your P&L statement, like 2.5% tied to money that should be rightfully yours is a really big, like a really big chunk of change for sure, especially as like a growing brand that's trying to thrive. So that's where I think, and then I think a lot of even the valid deductions and just having a really high trade spend really just kind of comes back to like what you agree upon originally to work with these distributors. Like there's definitely trade-offs for sure. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to, even just share out what some of these numbers that we've heard just by really going deep into the industry have been. Um,
One
and
thing,
just
Akash, I'm just curious about with that is how are you seeing brands kind of breaking down those codes to understand what deductions are even valid and which ones are invalid, or even tracking that they're just all being accounted for.
yeah, of course. We've seen different internal processes with a lot of the brands that we work with. It ultimately comes down to like, I guess you first become aware of these deductions when you receive a check, essentially. So, like the most consistent process we've kind of seen has been like every time you receive a check, having the thorough process of going through all the line items in that check you received and comparing that to like your internal like sources. So like if you think about like a lot of and it is like a cross-functional role almost like in a company just because usually a check will come into like accounting or finance and then you need to like work with sales and marketing to really understand like did we approve this promotion, etc. And then in terms of even just understanding what the deductions are, that is something I would say that's still like a challenge a lot of the times. Like, there have been folks that have like just created like a list of deduction codes, or you can open each deduction PDF that you're receiving and then like understanding what it is and creating a coding database. But ultimately, kind of is just like very manual effort.
Have you seen brands creating like a list of like these are just even all the things that you're agreeing for? I mean, I'll say from personal experience, I was selling T squares to KHE and Unify,
Yeah.
and a mistake that I made, right? We were a small, basically like a two-person team on the management side. We did not have like a list even of everything we agreed to and like documentation and stuff to track to be able to understand all the codes and what they actually meant. And so I think that was like a big challenge for us. It was like we don't even know what to expect to happen for us to compare or have a process figured out to do that.
Yeah, I think like at a certain point, brands start creating like promotional calendars just because you start at like the distributor level and then you go into like a retailer level. But ultimately, especially when you work with like brokers, etc., it is kind of hard to always create that paper trail unless it's like a process from the get-go. Like one of the slides that I have later kind of just I talked to some of our deductions experts in-house and we kind of just came up with a couple of strategies, but It's honestly just like a process thing of creating a paper trail so you can notify them, and then like having that high level like promotional calendar just to even know what you agreed upon.
Hank also asked in the chat, you mentioned like some of the 2% off deductions for spoilage. Is that, have you seen brands or here's any brands on this call have been able to negotiate that flat spoilage or damage fee? I
Yeah, it
know
seems
Akashi don't do actually have the actual like negotiating, right?
yeah. We have seen like a couple of examples, but it is very rare. It's like a very standard like Kehi relationship. But yeah, definitely would love to see in the chat if anyone has gotten by negotiating that.
Cool. Well, we'll wait for that. Yeah, why don't you jump through some of the examples of invalid deductions that happen?
Yeah, of course, definitely. So I kind of mentioned, there's a percentage of deductions here that are like invalid. And like after kind of just like the pattern recognition, et cetera, like just wanted to lay out some couple of examples that, we see all the time. So one is like short shipments. So the best way to kind of think about this is say that you received a PO from your distributor to ship 10 cases of your goods, and you do that, but then and then you think everything is good, and then get a deduction like 3 months later that they're claiming that you only shipped like eight. So that's like an example of a short shipment where you ship something to the distribution center and then you're getting a deduction that you didn't ship in full. So this is a really common invalid deduction, not necessarily because it's like designed to be wrong, but more so that you can kind of verify it very quickly. And I'll talk through some of those strategies in the next slide. The next one is like invalid, like promotional deductions. So this is where kind of having that organization process of knowing what you agreed upon and when is really important, because there's going to be examples here where say you agreed to like an MCB program for like 20% in January, and you assume that you'll receive deductions for that January period whenever it comes in. Verifying that's really important, because there's examples where you're getting charged for those same promotional, that 20%, but in February and March, and knowing those dates is really important. So there's examples of invalid deductions where you're being charged outside of the promo window. And then some examples that are kind of even just tied to like erroneous, just I don't know, like maybe data entry is just like charging for retailers you don't distribute to anymore. So say you like open an account with Sprouts in like last year, and then you stop shipping to Sprouts in Q1 this year. There could be a lot of examples where you're still receiving Sprouts deductions for like Q2 this year, even though you stopped distributing to them. And catching that's really important, because it's like an invalid charge, you stop distributing to them, but we see a lot of examples of that as well. And then there's a lot of like miscellaneous invalid deduction types that we've seen that can kind of come that require a little bit more like deeper digging. Like for example, you can like sometimes negotiate getting paid early from your distributors, and you like trade off like 2% of your margin to get paid early, like making sure you're still, getting paid in that like net 15 window instead of net 30, etc. We've seen examples of like erroneous charges where even though it wasn't paid early, you still got charged with like the early pay fee. Or sometimes if there's like an external audit firm from these distributors, they're charging you back for something that happened like 2 years ago and it may not actually be valid. Like we've seen examples of that kind of across the board, but these are some of like the most common examples that we see.
One thing in there that reminds me of as well is it's not exactly invalid, but I know lots of times during promo periods, distributors may overbuy and then continue to sell that product essentially at the lower rate future. It's not necessarily invalid. Sometimes they legitimately think you might sell more than you actually will. And other times they're kind of preparing for another big launch, right? If anything goes on sale, you're likely to buy more of it
Yeah.
as a consumer, right? So it makes sense. But one thing as a brand, you actually do have some power to talk with the demand and forecast, buyer to say like, hey, you're thinking we might sell in ordering 200 cases. We think it actually might be closer to 150 or 160. And like, can we reduce the order amount to match so you don't overbuy? And a lot of times they'll reduce the order from that.
Yeah, no, that's a really good example as well.
Cool.
Yeah, and yeah, this is just like it's like very little bit of couple of snippets, but just to get an example of how like, it's like what like an example deduction type could be of like a short shipment, for example, where like KHE, you get a lot of different deduction types. One of them is called like a UDR, or like an unloading discrepancy report. And this is usually when they flag an issue like a short shipment, and they essentially provide you with documentation of like what exactly, like what batch of products it's short for, etc. And I'll talk about this more, but like the example of how you would then verify this is you would need to have like your documentation of like when you shipped for that PO, and having like your signed bill of lading that shows that you shipped in full. So this is just a good quick screenshot example of like what that process kind of looks like.
We had two comments that just came in. Harry mentioned, I have a lot of issues with short shipments, and KT will not accept a bill of lading as proof in that situation. And Camille mentioned, we try to take a picture of every, skid before the truck leaves our plant so that we can fight short shipment deductions.
Yeah. No, like to Camille's point, that's like a really good way to create like a paper trail. And that's kind of like, the slide we got on. And yeah, like I think for Harry's point, like we've definitely seen like I think the content of the BOL is also very important, because like quantities of amounts being shown there directly tied to the PO is really important. So some things we also like to do is like not just even submitting a bill of lading, but also submitting the original PO and a pack list essentially. So you kind of have all three to kind of show the full trail. It's a clear cut case, but having that relevant content on the bill of lading is like super important. Just to be able to like show that you shipped in full. So like I think that's something to kind of like look into there. But yeah, so I mean, just even jumping into some strategies on just being able to validate deductions and having like a paper trail, just to know that you can cover your bases so that these charges, you have a way to verify them. So the first one is like contract compliance, and it's like essentially like what Jordan, you were mentioning a little bit earlier, where basically like to whatever extent you can, just working with your brokers and your buyers, to ensure that every promotion that is agreed to has like some sort of contract or like some communication outlining details. It can even be like an email paper trail that you can quickly reference to kind of just show that you agreed to like X during Y period. It's like really, really important, especially for like smaller like independents and things like that, because you may agree on your like high level promotional activity with KH and Unify annually or quarterly. But then once you start doing specific things with some of these like smaller retailers, or with your buyers directly, or your broker has authorization to approve a lot of things on your behalf, like that's where it's really important to start creating like some sort of like documented trail that you can reference when you flag something, because you can, just wake up one day and have a crazy like MCB deduction from Sprouts or something like that that you just did not expect, and like no paper trail to verify it. So just off the bat, like contract compliance is like super important here. And then I would say the other thing, and there's like templates, or even just like having a way to like quickly structure like a promotional calendar that outlines these details as well. It can, we see a lot of brands just have this in like a Google sheet, and it's kind of just breaking down by like time period, like month. First is like your distributor high level promotions, and literally just like a list of retailers, and then just what you agreed upon. And it's just like a nice pivot table, because I think ultimately these deductions come just like the actual just come like months after you've agreed upon these promotions, that you may not even remember that you agreed to like a really crazy opening order at like Sprouts to like make sure that you have like really good sell through in the beginning, etc. So promotional calendar also, especially when you're like, and it's like a good practice to kind of do it as you're planning like your discounts and things like that. And then finally, like detailed info.
Akash, one thing on that is when I have a question on is right, like let's imagine you're doing a promotional period for multiple retailers, but when the distributor is ordering, they might be ordering one, two, three POs. Like, how are you best aligning like the promotional amount, how much was purchased or should be charged back to the invoices or the time period so that you can say like, oh, they bought 100 cases during this period on this PO so that and make sure that that amount is correct.
Yeah, and that is one of like the big challenges for sure. Just because like when you receive deduction documentation, there's almost like three different date periods that are like tied to the deduction. So one is like the date that you received your remittance and check. Two is the actual like invoice date of when the deduction was charged. And then three is like when you actually open your deduction documentation, there's specific time periods of promo windows in which like a specific discount was charged. So like you can receive like an MCB deduction that has specific promo windows and a specific percentage that was taken off and things like that. I think like the only way to really do it is kind of have all of those three date periods kind of like tracked and also separated out. So you can essentially just do that manual verification. So I think ultimately it's just being able to get to the nitty-gritty of these deduction documents and see the actual time periods in which they're like charging you back and make sure that aligns with like the original agreement.
Awesome. Love that.
Cool. Yeah. And then the last part here is just detailed and just sufficient freight documentation. So, and this was, the discussion was kind of starting on the slide before where like we recommend a lot of our customers to just start the process of having like an organized like Google Drive or Dropbox that's broken down by like POs, having the invoices, as well as like the bill of ladings and which is like proof of deliveries whenever it's applicable, just so you can easily reference the PO whenever you get a deduction tied to it, just to quickly verify. We've also seen now companies using like more modern 3PLs to ship their goods that have like full digitized portals that's already broken out like this. And that's always really great as well because you can just like log into that portal, open reference a specific PO and see that the bill of lading is attached, the POD is attached and applicable, etc. But having that organized is really important. And even like we've seen companies that still receive like their bill of ladings and stuff physically, like as physical signed papers, like just having the process of like scanning them and just storing them digitally because it's just the best way to really keep track of like freight deductions when they come in.
Love that. A couple questions came in the chat, and let me
Yeah.
know if you can answer any of these. Do you know, so Kara asked, is a promotion different from an EDLP, which is an everyday low price? And they mentioned we've been asked to help to create by KeHE for a smaller retailer, but then I've heard that you can't have multiple prices in their system. So then EDLP would then become your main price for every KeHE buyer.
Yeah, so yeah, I guess I can't necessarily speak to if that's like the norm. I would say like EDLP is like a subset of promotions, like everyday low price, something you would see at like your grocery store. So yeah, I guess I don't have the best answer to here. One thing that we can definitely, just offer at the end also is like we have a team of deductions experts at Glimpse as well that we can definitely like happy to schedule like any quick calls with as well to answer any of these questions that are more nitty-gritty. But yeah, from my understanding today, I don't know if that's the norm, but yeah.
Yeah, and we had a situation where, right, because KeHE and Unified, they offer different prices to their or different discounts to their customers depending on tiers, different programs. And so talk with the category manager, the relationship manager to understand how that would affect things directly because you want to make sure that you have a clear understanding with them what that means because you can offer kind of authorize certain discounts or deals to certain retailers. The problem is then making sure that you're tracking that that's going to code it correctly. And so make sure that you have a clear understanding of like what information they need and a documentation for what you are providing and allowing for them. Then Jessica, love your comment. You mentioned you can also request from UNFI the full deduction invoices with each remittance, and they cannot withhold sending them. It will break down every line on what they charge back as an example, so that this can be super helpful in understanding, which is awesome.
Right. That's yeah, it's super helpful. It's definitely, we recommend that all the time as well.
Yeah, cool.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, just continuing to dive in now in terms of just like tangible strategies to reduce deductions. So starting off with like freight deductions, like, like the two ways, and these are honestly like when saying them, they sound like very straightforward. In practice, it really is just tied to process. But in terms of like reducing freight deductions, the first thing here, and this has all been a big point of the discussion so far, is just having detailed documentation from start to finish. So having your signed BOL that has to have like exact case quantities itemized to be able to like show that any freight deduction you're receiving is invalid. And that's how you can essentially reduce shortage and overage deductions, because when they come in, you can quickly dispute them. And then finally, if you can essentially just be really like just basically just like being organized internally as a process within the ops team, just like understanding like delivery windows and expectations from the bat and having those be tied to speed of shipment and really nailing that down is how you can reduce some of the freight deductions tied to late fees and service level fines. So for example, if you have an agreed upon window for shipment when you receive a PO from like KC and Unify, is really ensuring that you can hit that is like the biggest way to avoid like that subset of deductions. Um, and on the promo side, like I think the biggest thing also is just like documentation and visibility and organization at the end of the day. So for example, like with KHE, like essentially, annually you have to kind of plan out your like roadmap for national year deductions, promotions broken out by quarter, etc. You may have to work with your representative to understand like how much you need to do, like etc. But making sure that you have that documented and understood, and also really talking to your representatives here is the best way to like not get hit with any surprise charges or anything like that. And then the second one is where we've seen some of like the big horror stories with really large deduction amounts, is kind of just making sure that like the fees that you're agreeing upon for ads are documented with your retailer promotional contracts when you have them in writing. Because if there's something that was like soft circled or soft mentioned, is when you can really get hit with uncontrolled ad spend across with the specific retailer. So really just having that written out and just understanding like what you're committing to at any given point is really important. And then finally, yeah, like like working with your buyers directly with your brokers, like potentially you can receive like discounted spends or specific programs that you can work with together on is like one way to more directly reduce the overall deduction spend you're receiving on your promos. Cool. Yeah, I mean, I guess those were sort of the main like content slides I had in terms of like tactical ways to like reduce specific types of deductions and talking through them.
Awesome, Akash. Appreciate you walking through those. What we'll do now is open it up to any questions that the audience has, any thing that you've been going through or questions that you have around deductions, managing those, you can feel free to use the hand raise emoji or just type, question in the chat and I can invite you up to answer those. One story that I'll just share as well in the meantime is make sure that when you are starting out, one, you kind of build out the process for managing your deductions from the beginning. If you don't have one, like start now, basically, because there's lots of things that are probably happening in your business that you might not understand. As I shared in my recent post, when T-Squares, when we launched with a KE through Jolasco, we were like getting orders and sending product to the retailer through KE. And then slowly after a couple months started getting all these chargebacks and deductions that were like a couple $1,000s here or there. And as Akash shared, they were just kind of the codes on the invoice. And when we actually added up the amount for everything, it ended up being like a third of everything that we sold to the distributor was charged back, which basically eliminated our entire margin, right? And didn't have that visibility because we weren't actually tracking that. And so make sure that you're actually have yourself a process or build out a system or using a software to help manage this. All right, we have a question in the chat here. So is it Avnish?
I'm Nish. Yeah,
I'm
nice
Nish.
to meet you.
Awesome.
We're a brand from the UK, from London, and we're starting to work with KE. We have an opportunity to work with a small retailer. We just had a chat this morning discussing marketing and promotion plans. There's an option to charge or get charged by the retailer directly or via KE. What would you recommend that we do?
Yeah, I mean, Jordan, if you wanted to
Yeah,
share your
so
thoughts.
it kind of varies. Gosh, I'm just wondering, have you seen any particular like high deductions or issues that happen with getting freight, how that's picked up or charged?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just one direct to Avnish's question, I'd say like the only like potential risk with doing it through KE is the like potential erroneous doubling up of charges, like basically creating an extra layer. But in terms of like marketing and promotional related deductions, in terms of how it can be passed through essentially. But I guess, yeah, like that's like the only potential risk I can foresee off the bat. And then, yeah, like I can talk about this after too, but one thing that we can offer is like just time to ask any of these questions with any of our experts as well, if it could be like helpful.
Awesome. And Fred just mentioned if a retailer will bill you directly, do it. I mean, I
Yeah.
think in general, right? You just think about how most businesses, if someone's doing a service for you, they're going to charge a fee for you to do it. And so if things are like going through a distributor or elsewhere, then there's going to be not just that getting, it's not just passed through cleanly. They're going to charge a fee for processing that as well. So there'll be additional fees there. Henry just mentioned we've been asking retailers to invoice directly for ad display fees and scans. The invoices arrive quicker and we avoid fees from KT and Unify carrying the charge. Henry, have retailers been open to like doing that pretty easily or and have a process in place to do so? Or has there been, how I guess how hard is it to implement? You feel free to jump off on audio as well if you want to share that.
Yeah, I thought I'd just jump off on audio. Hello, everyone. Glad we're all kind of working this out together. There's a lot of kind of, it's a very, very challenging space for our businesses. We've noticed, some partners will do it, are willing to do it, some smaller kind of independent retailers on the West Coast. We haven't been able to achieve that with any of our kind of bigger partners like Sprouts. But yeah, we've had a handful coming through directly, and you guys called it out perfectly. You just want to make sure there's not the double charge through from KE. So that's the lookout, but you're saving a bunch of money because they charge you a percentage to carry, a $5,000 display fee is going to cost you 5.5 or something like that if you go through KE or Unify.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Any other questions from the audience? Well, one thing that we want to offer, if there's any more, just feel free to drop those in the chat. I invited Akash on as well because he's just particularly built Glimpse to work with emerging brands, right? To really help you understand how this all works. And so, Akash, do you want to share a little bit about the Glimpse platform to see, for people to help understand if it might be helpful for their business?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I can quickly go through like what we're doing here at Glimpse and just a little bit about our success so far. So essentially, we're an end-to-end deduction service, and we use AI behind the scenes to really streamline for like how we can work with brands. So just a quick high-level overview to kind of visualize like what the experience looks like working with Glimpse. So we work with KeHE and Unify primarily today. We're also launching direct retailers, like if you ship directly to like Target or CVS or anything like that. The main things that we basically do is we have like a dashboard where we'll automatically pull in all your deductions. We'll automatically categorize the coding of the KeHE and Unified deductions, and then all of the deduction documentation and backups that you receive, we'll use AI to pull out the relevant details like the retailers affected, the SKUs, the promo windows, some of those things we mentioned. And then we also have a full team of deductions experts in-house, and we're basically supercharging them with AI as well. So when you work with Glimpse, you'll have like a dedicated client manager and a deductions expert that's tied to your account. And we're essentially identifying, verifying, and fighting invalid deductions on your behalf. So you're basically getting like an outsourced deductions analyst and a software platform without any of like the hourly rates of like hiring someone. So that's like a little bit of a high level in terms of like the way our pricing and stuff works, and the way that we can kind of make it affordable for emerging brands is we do like a 2 month free trial. And then after that, we do like a low like monthly fee that's based on the number of doors you distribute to. But then yeah, though instead of having like that retainer, we basically take a percentage of what we win back for you. So we're basically like reviewing every single deduction for you, and then identifying and then disputing invalid deductions all the way until it's repaid. And we're like incentivized to do so. So we're just taking a cut of what we win. So it's like a win-win relationship that we're really focusing on. And we just launched, earlier this year. We're already working with 50 brands across KH and Unify, growing quickly. I mentioned like one of the offers we have is like a 2 month free trial. And then one other thing that we can also offer brands that may not be ready for a deduction service or have an alternative is we also have a free sales dashboard that basically plugs into like KH, Unify, and Whole Foods and gives you like very easy visualizations of just how your business is kind of doing. And just a little bit of like the numbers so far. So since we've launched in March, we're now processing over $20 million in deductions, which is, like a ton of PDFs that you can imagine that our software is kind of going through, validating, disputing. We work with 50 customers right now. The average customer that works with us pays for a year-long partnership with us within 60 days, like within that 2 month trial period in and of itself, because we'll actually look back at all of your deductions in the past year and identify any invalid deductions too. So when you work with us, it's not like you start on October 2nd. We'll look at everything historically as well. So the average customer sees like a 3x ROI just off the bat when working with us. And you can think about that for like a $10 million brand, probably in a year of working with us, we're probably identifying like 100 to 200K worth of invalid deductions that we're like getting back for them. So I think the best way to kind of think about it. And then, yeah, like this is just like a QR code to, I think, my calendar, but then also tryglimpse.com is our website. And if you're interested in scheduling like a meeting, just like feel free to add a note when scheduling a call that you heard about it through, this webinar and with Food Bevy.
Awesome. Appreciate that. Yeah. So what I would recommend everyone, right? It's free for 2 months to see how it works. Try it if it's helpful for your business, use it and you see how much money that you can save. If not, there's nothing lost. One thing, there are a couple other questions that came as well. So you can leave that out. You can scan the QR code if you want to jump in and see. Also check out the sales dashboard. I think that's super helpful. And maybe Akash, if we have a little bit of time at the end, maybe want to show like through the demo of what brands can see through that sales dashboard.
Yeah, I can
But we
definitely.
had a question from Kara. Any tips or feedback when deciding to do FOB or deliver with KH and Unify? When I was selling with T Squares, we had KH picking up from our warehouse. The biggest things you want to watch out for if you're using freight and you're sending freight to Unify or KH, you have to really make sure you use a logistics provider who sends a lot of shipments to those distributors because they're very particular in terms of scheduling a specific loading time. You have to have specific pallets. You have to have specific kind of dates that they show up. If there's not, there's all these additional fees. And so if you're doing your own freight, make sure that you have someone who like is an expert at delivering there. Otherwise, it's usually, in my experience, easier to have them pick up. So I think a
Yeah,
lot of
no,
those fees come back from those deduction and chargebacks come just from missed shipments or wrong standards.
yeah, definitely. And yeah, even just tied to one of the slides earlier, I think just like really that like organization internally to be able to like ensure you can hit delivery windows and timelines is probably the biggest thing for sure.
And Jessica mentioned, is there a way to speed up disputes processes? I've heard feedback that can take months to go through and actually get your money back on invalid charges. Do you have a sense of Kash of like how long it takes when you submit?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting thing because it does take a long time. We've been able to speed up the process a little bit in like two ways. So one is just having like a really good clear cut evidence and stuff just off the bat where, you know, there is not really much denial. And then the second thing is just like very consistent follow-ups. Like you kind of just have to follow up like every couple of days until resolution, and you can't kind of like drop the ball on it. For any like really serious charges that they're really just dropping the ball on or just being wishy-washy about, the only other thing you can potentially do is like escalate or try to go via your rep for very specific cases. But I think for most deductions, especially like clear-cut things like short shipments, etc., it's just really just like having all of your documentation off the bat and being just very consistent with follow-ups, which is really hard when you're like an emerging brand and don't have the bandwidth to keep track on everything. So yeah, if I had to bucket my answer in like two ways, like very clear-cut cases, is just being consistent and having all the evidence off the bat. And for very extreme cases, like here and there, you know, escalating it or like asking your rep to help escalate it internally.
One thing as well that I've heard just even like preventing these is making sure, right, at the end of the day, this is a relationship business, is everything else. And at the other end of people receiving the product, of placing orders, they're just people kind of doing their jobs. And a lot of times they don't really know about most of the brands that they interact with outside of like spreadsheets, email, a computer screen. And so, what are the things that you can go above and beyond to help build a relationship with everyone that you interact with? Right? Can you send a like welcome or sample box to everyone on KT that touches your business? Can you send something to the warehouse to share with the warehouse staff so they actually try your product, know about it, and when they see it come in, might take extra care in it, right? Because they feel like they have something that was representative of the brand, and so they want to look out for you. I think even as a smaller brand, those little touch points can make a huge difference in terms of having other people along the supply chain within the distributor looking out for you and your brand.
Definitely.
I know there's a lot of chat about pod foods in here. There's that probably definitely a whole nother conversation that can be set up about working with pot foods. I think, you know, the short answer for anyone is that yes, they can be helpful for brands who are just starting out to avoid KK and UNFI. At the same time, they are not the answer where everything's perfect. They still have a laundry list of fees that they charge. They just say that they're a little clearer in sharing what those fees can be upfront, but they are still there. But it might be helpful to have brands on to share their experience in working with Pot Foods before, because I've heard mixed responses from both. I sold to Whole Foods, or not Whole Foods, but to Pot Foods as well. As we end, Akash, do you want to pull up maybe the KE Unify dashboard? So one thing that I think is really cool is that Akash and his team developed this dashboard to track sales inventory for your like product. And it's actually a free tool that he's making available to any founder. And it's a pretty easy setup process that allows you to get a better understanding of your business.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I can just quickly walk through it. Yeah, as Jordan mentioned, this is completely free, like no strings attached. You can just like schedule like a quick 5 to 10 minute call on our website, and then it's just like a Google form to get set up. So it's super straight. But essentially what we do here is because we connect directly to these portals for the deduction data, we're taking the sales data that you receive in like Excels, you know, you have to transform them, etc., and just create like a very simple view to understand just your sales data. So with KE, you can kind of see like units sold over time, dollar sales over time, number of stores that you're distributing to in a specific time period. You can drill down to like retailer, city, state, product store, and distribution center. And like you can kind of like, for example, just like click into a specific SKU and it'll like update the whole data and you can look at it in a specific time period. So very, you know, simple to use, intuitive. We also, you can export out data into like an Excel if you ever want to do like more with it. We also give you like a velocity calculation as well that can be helpful in just understanding how you're kind of doing for like buyers, etc. Then we also have like an inventory dashboard, and this one's actually kind of interesting
Hey,
for
Koch, can I go
KD.
back to the velocity one? Because we would do that quickly. I think so many brands are trying to understand, like, essentially, what's my units per store per week? And this gives you a good calculation so you can understand it both from the unit perspective and dollars. And then what I love, right, is that you can actually break this down by like retailer, right? So that you can see what's my velocity at HEB, what's my velocity at Whole Foods, what's my velocity at different retailers. So you can understand where your best performing store is your worst performing. and track the trends over time to see if things are improving or if things are decreasing.
Yeah, I went through that kind of quickly, but yeah, that's a really good point and a really good use case of a lot of the brands that are using this. And then yeah, with inventory as well, you can kind of understand just your distribution, like inventory levels at distribution centers as well, and also what SKUs are starting to like sell out, and also inventory levels over time. So there's also another way to kind of understand trends of like just inventory depletion. And funnily enough, like Kehi only gives you a report of this for the day itself. But because we pull it daily, you also get this inventory over time. We do the same thing with Unify. And then Whole Foods is interesting. When you start shipping through Whole Foods, they actually give you like point of sale data via portal for free. So we can actually transform that. So the same velocity calculation with Whole Foods, it's a really good way to kind of keep track of actual customers selling through. So it's a really good way to keep track of like if you're launching with Whole Foods or a specific region, like what are customers actually buying and like why.
So I put the link in the chat. So click on that, sign up today. It's super simple to get your data onboarded. Akash, like when someone does that, like how long does it take to get that dashboard up and running?
Yeah, I guess we have been a little bit backlogged because of the demand recently, but we can get you a dashboard with all your data in there within a week.
Awesome. So definitely make sure to do that. Perfect. So everyone on this call, make sure you sign up for the dashboard, sign up for the 2-week free trial, see how much you're actually getting charged from deductions so that you can better understand your business and then make a decision on how you want to manage it. Akash, thanks so much for being on today. Thanks so much, everyone, for listening, participating, and your questions. As I mentioned, we'll be sharing the recording after the webinar, probably the next day or two. So keep an eye out for that along with the presentation. And then Melissa, I know you had a last question on, do you have any services in relation to Canadian retailers? I know for Akash, it's not right now for Glimpse, but we can look into, if you want to send me an email, Melissa, I can look into other providers who might be able to help with that. Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. If you love the webinar as well, would love for you to share that you attended on LinkedIn, give a shout out that you found it valuable. We have a couple upcoming webinars as well next week or in 2 weeks. And so make sure you sign up for those as well. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks so much.